Good morning, everyone. It's Dan Basse and Ben Buckner back with you on Friday, the last day of the week, the 21st of November. We're heading into the Thanksgiving holiday. Most brokerage firms will want to have December positions liquidated by Tuesday's close so we can see on Wednesday whether or not everything is squared up heading into holiday. First notice day on December futures is next Friday. Lots of talk, no announcements this morning to China in terms of new sales. There's a lot of talk that China's in different markets around the world trying to get out of cargoes now that it's been buying the United States. So obviously, China has bought too many soybeans. The question is, what can they do to modify that? Our own estimates here at Ag Resources, we are paring back January and February and March shipments from Brazil to China because of their abundance of soybeans. And so that's really key going forward for the bean market. Again, I believe that China's bought most of its length, has already covered, if you will, 10 or 11 million tons by buying futures. They'll then do versus cash, lock down the basis, and this will happen over the remainder of the crop year, not by the end of the year. So Ben, kind of take us forward. The markets have still kind of a risk-off mentality here this morning. Bitcoin's down at 83,000. We've seen a 36% decline there. Stock market's kind of rearing back, and there's a lot of risk-off, if you will, in the markets here today.
Yeah, I think things feel heavy, and that includes the grain markets. And I think that's kind of justified. Now, let's spend the end of the week talking about the general structure of things. And so what we've talked about is, the last really 6 months, 12 months, oversupply has been the theme. In absence of weather issues really worldwide, not a lot of big picture demand growth. And then we had the uncertainty about U.S.-Chinese trade relations and China ultimately coming to buy some measure of soybeans. We think it's about 3 million tons, pretty far cry from the 12 million tons that's been discussed. So here we are, and I think we're starting to focus more on the need to clear these what we know are pretty large inventories globally. So just checking in on markets where we are. The corn market, I think, understandably has been pretty dull when we take a look at the last decade or so, and even recently, just unable to break through chart support, big time chart support. And I think that makes sense because some things we've highlighted, record US production, and we'll soon talk about, I think, what's happening in South America and what's soon to happen there. We just do not see any reason that the corn market doesn't have to encourage an incredible amount of demand. That only happens with end user margins being pretty fancy and US corn being competitive globally. Soybeans, I think we've accomplished the goal of filling that pretty glaring gap that was left summer of 2024, and that's been done, and now we're extracting premium from the market. The meal market, a lot of short covering. We will get caught up with CFTC fund positions in about a month or 5 weeks or so, but the update we did get that got us through the first part of October, again, confirmed that the meal position prior to Trump and Xi's summit was incredibly short. So now we're testing the upper end of the range that we have seen in general broad bear markets and protein meal. And so I think that goal has been accomplished too. So from a big picture standpoint, I don't think we've done that much except for add some premium in the soybean market because of uncertainty over Chinese demand. What I think is staring at us in the face, and let's talk about Argentina. And so again, in the context of this general oversupply of grain markets, especially soon to be soybeans because of record South American production, the wheat market in Argentina, I think, is starting to tell us something pretty interesting, and it is unable to find a bottom every single day. It is by far the world's cheapest wheat by $30 per ton. It is now the cheapest grain on earth. And so I think that is validating estimates that we've seen for 24 or 25 million tons of wheat production there. That is an all-time record, maybe up 5 or 6 million from last year. All of that wheat needs to find a home in the foreign market, and that's what we're seeing increasingly. We've talked about this before. If we add that incredible wheat production number in Argentina to what we think will be a 58 or 60 million ton corn crop, you've got all-time high Argentine grain production, 82 million tons. The reason that we are so high on corn, I wanted to show you the yield chart on the left. The USDA, I think, is just for some reason too low on yield, below last year. We've got normal weather recently, normal weather upcoming. There are really no problems there. So the markets, grain markets especially, oversupplied today. I think that's being reflected in price a little more intensely this week. That probably, very likely, continues for the next 6 months or so. And I think Argentina may be the next catalyst for changes in direction and price. There is just a lot of grain in Argentina, and all that grain has to find homes. For context, I think the wheat harvest in Argentina will get to a level that surpasses domestic market needs in the next 5 or 7 days. So anything thereafter is going to be pushed out. And again, it is now offered below the price of world corn. That is something we've only seen for a few weeks in 2020-21. Then you have to go back to 2016. But this is just, again, telling us this story that there's a lot of grain in the world. The Argentine market, now the cheapest grain on earth, and starting to undercut really world corn prices everywhere. So if you think about flows moving forward, on the margin, do you start to lose what we've seen to be pretty incredible U.S. corn export demand because you can buy Argentine wheat at a cheaper price, especially in Latin America, the Caribbean. That Argentine wheat market is pretty attractive. So there's got to be a threat to this still. That's what we think, oversupply generally as we digest what's happening between the U.S. and China. But this is the 2-week South American forecast, looks pretty routine. And without getting too focused on weather, what I did want to highlight was just you still can't build this lasting dryness in Argentina. And so that would be my only real concern, as if lasting dryness heat were to develop, but that is not in the cards for the next 2 weeks. So as we get into the holiday period, we will be increasingly focused on what's happening in South America, but I don't think you can really have any concern at this point until maybe the second half of December. So again, like we've been talking about for a long time, be prepared. This oversupply issue hasn't been changed and doesn't change until the weather event. So that's, I think, what we're looking at when we think about kind of the medium term.
Yeah, good rundown, Ben. I think if you look in the rearview mirror, all we had was a rally that occurred from late summer because of the U.S.-China trade deal potential, and then everybody talking about something we didn't see at Ag Resource, which was yields that were going to be substantially declining. So our field tours back in August indicated that would not be the case, as the southern rust came in too late. In other words, it was just not there in terms of getting the crop early enough. That being said, we know there were some yield losses out there, but nonetheless, we are left with big crops. Corn's a supply bear market. The bean market starting to roll over, if you will, on how should I say it? China buying more from the U.S., but less from others. And that's the key. The pie is only so big, everyone, and we can slice it differently. But at the end of the day, someone needs to cut a price to sell somewhere else. I hope you have a good weekend, everyone. Ben and I will be back next week. I'll be speaking to you from Saudi Arabia as I've got some meetings there. But everybody have a great weekend. We look forward to talking to you soon. And if you want to take a trial to our newsletter, do so with that QR code right to the right here, and we'll go from there. Happy weekend, everyone.